1900, a 15-year-old black teenager named Preston Porter Jr. was killed by fire beside a railroad, just outside the small railroad town of Limon, Colorado. More than 300 white people gathered in the cold evening air to watch a child be tortured to death. This was not chaos. It was not a spontaneous act. It was a carefully staged ritual of racial power that reflected the entire nation, not just the South. To understand how this horror happened, you have to understand the world Preston lived in. In the late 1800s, black families were still fleeing the South, looking for work and safety anywhere they could find it. The Porter family had come from Lawrence, Kansas to Colorado because railroad jobs promised steady pay. Small towns like Limon depended on the railroad and hired crews from all over the country, including black workers who were often given the dirtiest, most dangerous jobs for the lowest pay. The Porters were new to the area. They worked hard. They kept to themselves. And like many black families in the West at the time, they carried the constant fear that anything done by any white person could be blamed on them at any moment. On November 8th, a white girl named Louise Frost was found dead. Within hours, newspapers and local officials began repeating the same mantra used across America whenever a white woman or girl was harmed. They claimed that a black suspect must be responsible. There was no evidence. Rumor became fact. And soon the newspapers announced that the Porter family had left for Denver. It did not matter that they left before the girl's body was discovered. It did not matter that they had done what many laborers did every week, which was travel to Denver to look for work. In the eyes of white authority, their departure was suspicious, and suspicion was all it took. For black people in 1900 America, guilt was assumed long before truth was ever considered. Law enforcement in Denver arrested the father Preston Sr., the older brother Arthur, and 15-year-old Preston Jr. They were placed in the Denver City Jail. What happened inside that jail followed yet another pattern seen in hundreds of lynching cases. Officers threatened suspects with mob violence. Crowds gathered outside jails. Reporters were allowed inside interrogations. And teenagers like Preston were isolated, frightened, and told that their only hope was to confess. 4 days after their arrest, newspapers reported that Preston had confessed to the crime, supposedly to save his father and brother. But confessions in the era of lynching can rarely be trusted. If you find this story compelling, please like and subscribe to the Blatant History channel. This allows me to put out more hidden content. False confessions often came after threats and beatings, after isolation, and after the promise that a confession might give their loved ones a chance to live. The fear of a mob was enough to make any child say anything. Preston understood exactly what was waiting for him, and so did the sheriff of Lincoln County. The governor of Colorado ordered the sheriff not to bring Preston back to Limon for at least 8 days because state officials knew a mob was ready. But the sheriff ignored the order. He took Preston from a safe jail in Denver and put him on a train headed straight toward the waiting mob. This was not incompetence. It was cooperation with the mob. Local sheriffs across the nation played the same role. They did not legally lynch people. They simply delivered them to the mob and stepped aside. As the train approached Limon on November 16, more than 300 white men, women, and children were already gathered near the tracks. They came from all over Lincoln County. Local ranchers arrived on horseback. Railroad workers walked from the yards. Families brought their children as if attending a holiday event. Even the father of Louise Frost was there. Newspapers later described the crowd calmly waiting as if attending a public ceremony. And that is exactly what a lynching was. A ceremony of white supremacy. The mob marched Preston to a railroad stake and chained him to it. They allowed him to read from a Bible and to pray. He was a terrified child, facing a crowd that believed it was doing the work of justice. Burning someone alive was not common in Colorado. It was a ritual borrowed from Southern lynching culture, where mobs believed fire would purify the accused. By choosing fire, the people of Colorado were proving that racial violence belonged in the West just as much as the South. As the flames reached Preston, newspapers recorded his screams. He cried out, "Oh my God, let me go. Please let me go." When the ropes holding him burned through, and his body fell partly out of the fire, the mob poured more kerosene and threw more wood on him to force him back into the flames. His last known words were a prayer, asking God to have mercy not only on himself, but on the men killing him and on the little girl and her father. This was torture sanctioned by silence. It was a murder committed in public, with hundreds of witnesses, including members of law enforcement, standing by. Yet afterward, no one was arrested. No one was questioned. The coroner issued the standard phrase used across the United States. He wrote that Preston died at the hands of parties unknown, even though everyone knew exactly who was there. The entire community protected the killers because in their eyes, they were not criminals. They were protectors of white society. After the lynching, Preston's father and brother fled Colorado and returned to Kansas. They understood the truth. Once a black family was associated with a crime, even without evidence, they could never live safely in that community again. Their departure was exactly what many white residents wanted. Lynching was not only a punishment, it was a tool to drive black families out of towns and counties and to maintain racial purity in the region. The reaction of the state legislature reveals even more about the era. Instead of confronting the mob, they reinstated the death penalty. They claimed that if the state had the power to execute people, then mobs might not take the law into their own hands. But the truth was that states used the death penalty in ways that targeted black defendants just as relentlessly as mobs did. It was simply a more official way to control black life. The lynching of Preston Porter Jr. was one of 6 racial terror lynchings documented in Colorado. But it must be understood as part of a national system. Between 1865 and 1950, more than 6,500 African Americans were lynched across the United States. In almost every case, the pattern was the same. A white person was harmed. A black person was accused. Evidence did not matter. Confessions were coerced. Crowds felt entitled to kill. And officials protected the killers. What makes Preston's story especially painful is that he was a child. A 15-year-old boy facing hundreds of adults who believed they were righteous. His death reveals the deep contradictions of the era. The crowd believed they were upholding morality. But what they truly upheld was a violent system built on fear, superstition, and white supremacy. Colorado today rarely teaches this story. Most people have never heard of Preston Porter Jr. But his story forces us to confront a truth that many Americans prefer to avoid. Lynching was not a Southern phenomenon. It was a national phenomenon. It was not the work of a few outlaws. It was the work of everyday citizens who believed that terror was justice. Remembering Preston is not just about recording a tragedy. It is about understanding the world that produced it. A world with a law bent to the mob, where fear replaced evidence, where a 15-year-old boy's life could be taken in public and celebrated as an act of civic duty, and where the silence of the government allowed it to happen again and again. Today we speak his name to restore the humanity the mob tried to erase. Preston Porter Jr. was a child. He was a son. He was a brother. He deserved the full protection of the law. He deserved a childhood. He deserved a future. And he deserved a nation willing to defend his rights. His story reminds us why historical memory matters. Because when we forget the victims of racial terror, we risk repeating the lies that allowed it to flourish.